Welcome everyone, it's the Crypto Alert coming to you from Singapore at the Coin Market Cap Capital event, and I'm joined by Matthew Spoke of Aeon. How's it going, man?
I'm doing well, man. It's good to see you again.
Yeah, absolutely. Good to have you back on. Now, we're going to be talking about all of the really big updates that have been going on, and I think first what we're going to jump into is kind of the rebranding to the Opalin Application Network. So you tell us a little bit about, tell us a little bit about that.
I mean, this is, I think probably the one thing that we got a lot of questions about online is it felt sudden to people. So one thing I'll clarify is that this has been like a work in progress for us for about 7-8 months at this point. So we started a process back earlier this year to kind of review what had we accomplished as a project, what were like our most proud accomplishments in terms of technical milestones and features that we had built into our protocol, and where did we think we were falling short in terms of standing out and differentiating ourselves from our peers. And the biggest realization that we had is that we were in this very crowded space of projects talking about the exact same thing, DApps and decentralized the internet and DAOs and DeFi, and effectively if we were objective and honest about it, it felt like we were all just kind of playing copycat to Ethereum.
Yeah.
Nuances and tweaks to the way we were building our tech. Well, we can do this in Java, we have an AVM, we have all this great technology that we were really proud of, but we didn't have a compelling difference to pitch to why you as a user, as a developer, as a company should pick us over them, right? And I think, if I, analyzing that reality that we were in, I didn't feel like we were making a difference. I think Ethereum is doing a very good job at building out the narrative for the decentralized internet problem statement. So we stopped and figured out that we needed to go find a more compelling real world use case that we wanted to sink our teeth into. I came from a background before starting Aeon that was really a lot more around real world enterprises and businesses and how they were going to interact with this technology. And so we went and kind of focused a lot of our research around large scale online platform markets. And the fact that these are growing at an incredible pace. They're the things we use every day. They're the Ubers we get into and the Netflix shows that we watch and Shopify, etc. And within these markets are these interesting economic designs that are now starting to show that they have some weak points and they have some frictions that are starting to pop up. So we started focusing in on that. We did a lot of interviewing of companies that operate in that space, either the platforms themselves or companies that are dependent on these platforms. Like if you're a merchant in Shopify, for example. And a lot of common themes started kind of surfacing. And we wanted to figure out, hey, if we understood this problem statement well enough, could we find a way to effectively reposition the way we talk about our protocol to solve some of these problems? So people would have seen this over the last few weeks. We started aggressively talking about platform problems. Boiled it down to 3 common themes we saw against most of these online platforms around data ownership and customer ownership and just the broad idea of who owns what when you're interacting on these platforms. I was talking to Ivan on Tech earlier here at the conference, who runs a YouTube channel, and he was saying, what frustrates me most as a YouTuber is I don't own the relationship with my subscriber. YouTube owns it.
That's right, and your access to that is at the grace of YouTube.
Absolutely, and so
we love you, YouTube.
Please don't shut us down. So that was a pretty, and that theme was common against Shopify, it was common against Uber, it was common against all these platforms, and then there was this idea of stakeholder alignment. If Shopify does something for the benefit of its merchants, it often is doing it at the expense of its customers or at the expense of its app developers, right? And then finally there was this broader concept around common goods, things that should exist that don't because they're not in anybody's best interest or not in anybody's economic interest to build. Probably most recently, the news that really caught our attention was these new gig economy laws around how do you ensure that a DoorDash food delivery person could get health benefits when they're not an employee of DoorDash. So it's not in DoorDash's best interest to provide health insurance.
Of course not.
But this person is putting themselves on the road, biking in traffic and potentially getting hit by a car. So there's this gap that we call common goods. Who's going to provide that type of service? Inside those 3 problem statements, we started figuring out that there was a need for a new type of software, a new type of application that we could pitch to developers in mainstream markets that took advantage of all the best characteristics of a blockchain, but we weren't pitching it because it was a blockchain, we were pitching it because it solves a problem. And then we can just kind of explain to people, by the way, it's only possible if this exists on an open global infrastructure. For us, that was the big difference between a decentralized app, which if I use a simple, probably overly simplistic analogy, when people say I hate Uber, I'm going to build decentralized Uber. versus an open app, which to us is like, oh, Uber has some characteristics that we don't like. Let's build features that are additive on top of Uber that allow a driver to pull their reputational data out of Uber, use it somewhere else, right? So that's like, it's more building extensions and additive capabilities on top of these platforms. So the name change is really around who we're talking to on the user base. Open Applications is now the narrative we're building towards that mainstream audience around rethinking the economics of these markets. These people are not crypto people. They don't necessarily care about how the inner workings of these protocols work, but they want to understand a problem statement. So for us, it was closed platform versus open application. Let me pitch you around the open application concept. But it's only possible if it sits on top of a network that is distributed and globally accessible. And so Aon, we figured, continues to be the name of the asset because it's well known in the industry. It's a brand that people have kind of like spent a lot of time getting familiar with. And we need to pitch it in the context of like the economic security of the system that's going to power open applications. So now we're operating under these two distinct brands, but they're very, very intertwined.
Absolutely. One kind of enables the other, right?
Exactly.
And it's so refreshing to me to hear you talking about really redefining your I guess, I mean, maybe this has always been the mission, but making yourself stand out. It's so true what you said. There's a lot of people trying to, do what Ethereum does, but it's the 8-minute ab kind of conversation, a little bit faster, a little bit, with this, that, and the other. Like, let's actually do something that's going to really bring value in, because as much as we might get excited, like, ooh, that's low block latency there, man, that's hot. Like, that's most people don't care about that, right? So
that's a perfect example.
This is the kind of stuff that we need solutions for that are actually going to help people have better lives. And like you said about the Uber example. This guy can take his reputational data with him. That's big. That's big. You spend all this time on a platform. That's probably one of the biggest reasons why people stay with, for example, Uber, and they don't go to like Ola or Gojek or something else, because like, oh, but I've got all my referrals over here and I don't want to start from zero again, which is how the platforms lock you in. And it's about building the tools to help us work with the platforms that we already have, because the network effect of Uber and YouTube and Facebook.
Yeah, trying to reinvent that is ridiculous.
We'll invent something new, like TikTok's taken off because it's a new thing. It's not a tweak on Facebook, which any tweak on Facebooks have not worked, because much like with anyone who's trying to copy Ethereum, they have not found their own mission.
I'll say, with the exception of Dogecoin, killing it as an altcoin of Bitcoin.
Well, Dogecoin is the standard. Everybody knows that.
Yeah, everything should be priced in Doge. We all know that. That's the eventual outcome.
That's right.
No, I think that's exactly right. And the simplest way we put it is that us and most of our peers, we had built this entire industry over the last 5 years since a lot of the renewed interest came in, was very, very like solution-focused narratives. My blockchain is better than your blockchain because X. TPS or block time latency or decentralization or whatever, but none of that really spoke to like, what problem are you solving? So we were all solution building, like solution narrative, and like, as simple as it sounds, if you can articulate a problem and you can convince people that that problem is big enough to solve, then you tell them about the solution, not the other way around. And that's been like a big change of mindset for us, and it's been really refreshing, because the team, like, frankly, has been like extremely reinvigorated, because we actually now feel like we have like a very, very meaningful and meaty purpose to go solve. Versus we want to build a blockchain that's better than other people's blockchains, which, was a fun, like, there's a lot of technical problems to solve. There's a lot of academic, like, challenges to like sink your teeth into. But if you don't know what the end goal is, it eventually starts to get a little dry.
Now, I want to move the conversation a little bit to talking about, you have basically, so Aon was proof of work, and you guys merged to a proof of work, proof of stake system. So can you tell us a little bit about that? What was the reaction from the mining community around that in particular?
Well, so that hard fork has not happened yet. That hard fork is on the 19th of November. We announced, we made the staking interface live this week, so people could actually start delegating their coins, but it doesn't actually change the way blocks are produced until the 19th. So there'll be a hard fork on the 19th. So a couple of things that went into that. One, building out this new narrative for open applications, we needed to make sure that the system itself had a certain threshold of security. A small proof of work network, as unfortunate as it is cheap to attack. It's a 51% risk. When you only have so much mining power and the value of the coin is only so high, you do the math and you realize that it's actually not a big threshold to attack. We put the challenge to our research team to come up with a model that, one, would allow us to upgrade, and for context, this is a pretty large feat. We're going to be the first blockchain to move from proof of work to proof of stake. It's never happened before. Proof of stake systems that exist now have launched on day one as proof of stake systems. There's never been a hard fork from one to the other. But it also had carried with it some limitations. The reason we're going through a hybrid kind of transition period is because we need to make sure block production doesn't stop in the process of that hard fork.
Yep.
We've been producing blocks the same way for the last year and a half. Blocks have to continue being produced a moment after the hard fork happens, right? So in the process of doing that, though, we also had an opportunity to revisit the economics of the system. So we hired a company called the Prism Group. We're going to be publishing at some point the results of that. We published the economic paper late last week, but we'll eventually publish the results of this audit. Prism is like the leading crypto economic kind of advisory firm. It's a bunch of like PhD economists that spend time thinking about, you know, security and systems and the types of rewards and distributions of transaction fees and all this stuff that need to be true for a system to grow over time. And we needed to revisit what was the base metric of 1% inflation, which is what we were paying on mining.
Yep.
And 1% inflation was 1% forever, meaning as the supply grew, 1% stayed constant.
Yeah.
Now what we've done is we've revisited the way we do block distribution. We've increased the inflation it'll be 4.5 aeon per block. 4.5 aeon per block today translates to about 3% inflation, which relative to our peers is still extremely low, but it stays flat at 4.5 aeon, not a percentage.
That percentage goes down over time.
The percentage reduces over time. And the thesis there is that what you really want to get to is you want to get to a market where transaction fees are rewarding miners and stakers, not block rewards. And it's a combination of the two, but block rewards are effectively a function of they're a subsidy for security, because you're inflating the system to provide a subsidy to incentivize somebody to secure the system. Eventually you get to this like uptick where there's enough transaction volume happening on the system that they're earning more money from fees than from block rewards. And that's what the long-term view of these networks needs to be. And so when you hear of systems saying, hey, we'll provide you 20% ROI on our staking, these are unsustainable inflation models. They're very, very short-term views, right? And so that transition has been super well received from the miners, because miners, a moment before the hard fork, are making 1.5 aeon per block, but they're winning every block because it's only miners. After the hard fork, they're making 4.5 aeon per block, but they're winning every other block. So they actually increased their proportionate reward as a mining community. So we'll see miners super
excited by this. So they're getting like a 0.75 aeon increase for each block, something
effectively,
that they get, right?
Effectively 3% being the overall inflation on year one. That means a 1.5% going to the miners when they used to only make 1%. Right. So they're getting this 0.5% bump. And then there's a new incentive being built for stakers. And so on the staking side, we've had like an enormous amount of like positive reception from the staking community. And this is a community that is brand new to us, where we have to now go develop relationships with staking services and pools and people that run these like delegation services, so that we could, you know, provide some like professional on-ramps for people that you can directly stake into the protocol, but it's easier kind of in mining. You can directly mine, but you can more often than not, you'll see people participate in a pool. So we're seeing these pools kind of sign up. So we had 18 pools that we announced last week that are some of the larger and better known pools from like the Cosmos ecosystem, Tezos, Terra, and some pretty like well-known and well-funded companies. So we're really excited about that. And also some like really, really grassroots pools that have been longtime community supporters like Aeon Pool Tech and others that have just been like mining for a long time and now are adding a staking function, which is a super cool way to do it as well. So
well, I think this expands the community out too, because now you're actually letting more people be involved, because as much as we might want people to be out there mining, most people aren't. Most people aren't, but they might be staking. You're certainly getting a lot more people who are actually invested long term.
Well, it's easy, right? For an average person in this community, I mean, like, one, you know, earn yourself a reward, but also help ensure the security of the system. So we have goals over the course of, you know, 3 to 6 month window. We intend to get the staking participation to about 30% of the total supply.
Nice.
So it's about 150 million aeon that we want staked.
Yep.
In 2 days since launching the interface, and block production hasn't even started on staking, we already have 20 million aeon in the.
That's great.
I'm remembering the last numbers. Roughly 20 million aeon already staked in 2 days. Now, if you're a coin holder, you can help secure the system, right? At that 30% threshold, we start to get to a really, really good cost of attack, cost of security, which starts to give us a lot more confidence. Obviously, over time, confidence in the coin is what will develop long-term security, because it means it's more expensive to buy stake, it's more expensive to mine, because there's more people competing effectively. And so that needs to be built into the narrative around where we're going to get adoption from. Because confidence in the coin effectively is going to come from our use cases and our developers and these apps that are going to get built on the Open Application Network. So
now, in terms of staking, can you just get, for any, I'm sure, because this is what everyone's going to want to know, like, how many coins do you need to stake? Is there a minimum stake that you have to put in, or can you stake with any amount of Aeon?
Yeah, so biggest design principle was we needed to maintain that this had to be, in theory and in practice, a purely decentralized system. People can aggregate around pools for efficiency, but they can stake individually if they choose to. They can stake a single Aeon, they can stake 100 million Aeon.
Yeah, you only need one, guys, only one.
At a single Aeon, what you'll find is that the economics don't make sense for you to run your own server.
Yeah.
Right, because it's just the reward's too small.
That's right.
So up to a certain threshold, it'll economically be more logical to delegate to somebody else and pay a fee, because they have a professional server that's connecting to the network. But the protocol is actually pretty lightweight. Like if you wanted to, you could run staking infrastructure on your laptop, but you have to be up on the network 100% of the time to get the blocks, because you have to be signing blocks on the network, right? So yeah, in theory, a single Aeon, and in theory, anybody could directly stake, but we'll likely see people delegate to professional services.
Yeah, well, it makes it easy for a lot of people who just, I want to get the reward, but I don't want to do the work to get the reward.
Exactly.
But they're putting their money up, so they are kind of doing the work.
And I think the other thing that's probably worth noting, because a lot of people hear delegation and they think of like a custody risk, because you're like giving your coins to somebody. So one of the things that we designed was to make sure that the system was designed to be non-custodial, meaning I stake my coins into the protocol. They're still controlled by my private keys, but I tell the protocol to give the right to vote on my coins to somebody else, but the coins still belong to me.
Nice.
So you're delegating the right to vote on your coins, but you're not delegating your coins, if that makes sense.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Now, the final question I have for you: what is the most exciting thing that is being built by the community or anyone working with you on Aeon right now?
So, two-part answer to that. One, what we've built that is kind of a layer above the protocol, that's a big part of this new direction. When we're going into this new market category, we're talking to developers that have never touched a blockchain infrastructure before. So biggest realization for us when starting to interview users was they needed a significantly easier on-ramp to actually plug in a feature into an app. So for us, that's being built in what we're calling open kits. So on top of the Open Application Network are effectively these SDKs that we're calling open kits. Open kits are being built around kind of thematic use cases. So we have something called open economy, open identity, open governance, open funding, and eventually there'll be a longer list. These are going to be interfaces that an app developer that wants to build on top of Uber's API and wants to plug into one of our SDKs, they'll be able to like invent really interesting features kind of at that intersection. API of Slack plus open economy builds something really cool. It's something that we're actually in the process of building. So one of the things that we're doing is we're going into some of the more popular marketplaces, Slack, Shopify, Uber, YouTube, and we're starting to pre-build some of these templated integrations. So we started building something internally we call Open Slack. That's effectively the ability for anybody who knows how to build a Slack bot to build a Slack bot that interacts with our blockchain in a way that you can, let's say, issue a kudos to your buddy on Slack, and that kudos is actually a coin that they can redeem for value off Slack. And so the ability to like take an asset in and out of Slack as if it were a wallet interface, but not actually giving like the crypto experience, giving like a very, very simple user experience. On top of these, we have businesses being built. One that I think the community would be very familiar with, people that follow us know of our story with our friends at Velocia. Velocia is launching first week of December. It's a company launching in Miami. They've got a huge amount of support from the municipality of Miami. They're doing a press conference for launch with the mayor, and they're effectively becoming the default rewards program for the entire city of Miami to get people out of traffic. So that's an open application that's going to be built to integrate to Uber, to Lime, to carpooling services, to public transit. And effectively what they're building within Velocia is the ability to provide, to push campaigns to say, hey, during peak rush hour times, if you get on public transit or hop in a carpooling service and it reads the APIs of all of these different services, we'll reward that behavior by giving you some sort of a redeemable point. And so that to us is a perfect example. Like they're not building a new Uber, they're extending Uber's features with this new kind of asset class, right? And because it's been so seriously backed by the municipality, it's now, they've literally got posters on every bus in Miami, every public transit system is now saying, hey, download Velocia. This is going to be the new way that we incentivize people getting out of traffic effectively. And then we have another project that we just announced last week that's in the video streaming kind of world. It's a company called VivoPlay. They're building a product called Vivo Pago. It's a Latin American company, originally based out of Venezuela, which is super contentious these days. This is a video streaming product that has today 4 million subscribed users, kind of a Netflix, but for Latin American content, if you can think of it that way. And they're building out this marketplace effectively to connect content creators, consumers, advertisers with a new asset because they can't rely on the local currency in Venezuela anymore. And so that is going to kind of bridge together this like multi-sided marketplace around content creators and advertisers with a new coin that they're building on top of the Open Application Network also. And so we're pretty excited about that one because it also tells the story of like the video streaming platform world and how you can do better economic designs within like the multi-stakeholders that exist there. We've got a couple of other ones in the works that we're doing a lot more business development to go chase after some like bigger fish in the platform world to show them what is possible and what they can enable using this. Our next 6 months is really focused on bringing like some tangible real world use cases to the table to show people like why this matters on their cell phones in their daily activities, not in some like obscure theoretical way. So last 6 months has been focusing on getting the narrative out and getting the brand out. Next 6 months is like bringing real tangible things to people.
Amazing stuff, amazing stuff. I love having these catch-up chats because you've been so busy. You've been doing so much, and it's amazing to see all the development that's going on and that just vision to deliver. So it's really cool stuff. Thank you so much for coming on and informing the community about what's been going on with now the Open Application Network.
Yeah, thanks for the time, man.
Thank you so much.